Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can all hear us well. It's a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon to talk about the broad topic that is protein and what are the impact on protein at the market level and as well at the animal level. And so to discuss about this super interesting topic, I'm here today with Elisabeth and Emmanuel. Elisabeth, could you please introduce yourself in a few words?
Hello, everybody. I'm Elisabeth Santin, and I'm head of R&D in Jefo that we call Applied Science Curiosity. I'm very excited to be here today.
Thank you, Elisabeth. We are happy to be with you here as well. And we also have Emmanuel.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Emmanuel Landeau. I'm in charge of the technical department at Jefo Europe. So I'm happy to be with you today and to talk about protein.
Great. And so finally, I'm Anouk Cottin-Tillon for those who don't know me, and I'm the Poultry Market Manager for Jefo Europe. So as we mentioned, we are going to talk about protein, but before diving into the science and into the subject, just a quick comment about this webinar. So the duration is 1 hour, and we are going to have a discussion together. If you have any question to make it more lively, please write them down in the question box inside the GoToWebinar platform, and then we will address them during the discussion or after. We will have some time to discuss at the end. And if by any means we don't have the time to answer during this hour, we will come back to you later. So now that we are all ready to start, we are going to share some more information about protein and how these constraints, that is protein, which is very important for the animal growth, can vary depending on the market and all variations that can be brought with the quality of the product as well. And for the more scientific part, what is happening in the gut when we are talking about protein, and how can we assess this impact that protein can have. So to start with that, I'm going to share my screen and to have to share some figures about the actual market. So now you should all be able to see my screen. So about the market, at the moment, as I am sure that you are all aware, we can see a huge increase of all the raw material prices that started at the beginning of this autumn. And for instance, when we talk about wheat in France, it has increased by more than 45 euro per ton between this summer and right now. And when we focus more closely on the protein sources price, we can see that we have this same trend. And for all the protein sources, we have the same, with an increase that jumped from 25% to 35%, depending on the raw material that we are looking at. And when we, of course, go more in depth into the broiler feed cost, it does have an impact. And we can see on this graph here that in the last years, it was quite stable with a fluctuation that was around 240 euro per ton. And then starting in August, September, it increased a lot. So of course, it affects the production cost, but this increase in price in terms of protein sources cost is not the only issue. I guess, Emmanuel, when you are formulating and everything, what other problem can be brought by this rise?
Of course, Anouk, it's not the only aspect. We have seen with your graph that we have some variability in terms of price of protein, but we can consider also that we have variability in terms of quality protein, okay, or in terms of variability, in terms of quality of the protein sources. If I take an example, I can share with you the results of this very recent peer review. It's a meta-analysis from 18 published paper on the quality of soybean meals. Okay, we know that soybean meals is the main, I would say, the main raw material for providing protein in our feeds. And when we look at the results of this meta-analysis, we clearly see that, okay, in average, the content in terms of protein of a soybean meal is 46%. This is what we normally expect from a soybean meal, but you clearly see that there is quite a huge variability in terms of level of protein of those soybean meals. Comes from 42% to 50%. Okay, so there is a variability in terms of level of protein in this main proteic raw material that we are using in our poultry feeds. Okay, but there is also variation or variability in terms of other components. If we look at, for example, fiber, and if we focus on neutral detergent fiber, you clearly see that there is also a huge variation and a huge coefficient of variation. Here it's standard deviation, but if we calculate the coefficient of variation, we have a huge one. So first point, I would say, we have a variability in terms of chemical composition, okay, and level of protein, for example. But the second aspect is that we can also have a variability in terms of quality of this protein. It's not only level of protein, but also the quality of the protein. In the same peer review, okay, they analyze the different, or they characterize the different way of the quality of the protein, okay, by urease activity, by protein dispersibility index, by protein solubility, or the activity of trypsin inhibitors. And we clearly see that in this peer review, they show that depending on the origin, for example, in this article, it was they was analyzing they were analyzing the quality depending on the origin, and we clearly see that there is some difference in terms of quality indicators of the protein. When we see this, we clearly can link this with digestibility, okay? Because when we look at those quality indicators, we can imagine and we can expect that this variability in terms of quality indicators could be linked with the digestibility of the protein and I would say the availability of the protein by the animal. And if we look at this article, this article coming from Poultry Science, it's also a meta-analysis, okay, and they clearly demonstrate, okay, with different soybean meals, different origins of soybean meals, they clearly see, or they clearly saw a huge variability in terms of ileal digestibility of this protein, okay? If we look at, for example, crude protein, this digestibility, ileal digestibility of protein goes from 71% to 88%, and it's exactly the same for the different amino acid or main amino acid. Okay, so variability of quality indicator means variability in terms of digestibility and availability for the animals to grow, of course.
Okay, so yes, it's an impact on this digestibility. And do you have more example of how it will affect the animal performance and what impact?
Once we see this variability in terms of digestibility, we can expect variability in terms of zootechnical performances. Okay, and if we focus on this point, there are some studies demonstrating that depending on the intake of digestible lysine, okay, there is a variation in terms of body weight gain. This graph comes from a literature review of 20 trials. Okay, so we clearly see that if we have a variability in terms of digestibility of protein or digestibility of amino acid, in this case digestibility of lysine, we clearly see that we will see an impact in terms of body weight gain. Okay, so there is a link between digestibility of protein and performance of the animal. But what is also interesting, because if we look at this, we can say, well, okay, but we control this by formulation, okay, and we can adjust by formulation the level of amino acid and the level of digestibility. But what is really interesting, in a very recent article, they also mentioned that undigestible protein means less performances. Okay, so most of the time we control by formulation, we control digestible protein by controlling digestible amino acid, but we do not necessarily control the non-digestible part of the protein. And in this recent article, they clearly demonstrated that with the variation of non-digestible protein, there is no impact on feed intake, so it could not be detected, I would say, by variation of feed intake, but it clearly impacts negatively body weight gain and feed conversion ratio. So it means that by increasing non-digestible protein, it means that we will have less body weight gain and feed conversion ratio. And in this study, of course, the level of digestible amino acid was the same. Okay, so it clearly demonstrates that what is important, of course, it's digestibility of the protein, but also non-digestibility or undigestibility, the undigestible part of the protein.
Okay, very interesting. And Elizabeth, could you explain to us from what is the process, what is the physiological mechanism that are explaining what Emmanuel shows us? We can't hear you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. So what happens is very interesting. This is a very common situation when you have like a high increase of price. Normally, the quality of ingredients is not always the most important aspect that people look at. So what Emmanuel is saying is that even if you reformulate to attend to the level of requirements of the animals, the undigested protein that is there will affect. And this is what happens. So if you come back and examine the physiology of digestion, you're going to see that in the stomach of the animal, we're going to have big molecule of protein that is basically a chain of different amino acids with different another carbohydrates or lipids. But the important here is that when you receive the actions of chlorhydric acid and pepsin in the stomach, this big molecule become a small one, but still not small enough to be absorbed. So at the intestine, these parts will receive the actions of the endogenous protease that come from the pancreas, and then they're gonna have a digestion and small parts and small peptides or amino acids to be absorbed. And it's the good things. But what happens is that all the undigested protein that is there will be going to the end of the small intestine and colon and cecum, where they gonna be fermented by the microbiota. So the microbiota ferment this undigested protein, and they produce a lot of metabolites that it's a pro-inflammatory molecules. So these conditions happens mainly, of course, because of substrate factors like the presence of gozipol. The antitrypsin factor in soybean is a very important matter. We have these publications from Janela that show that 20% of the regular soybean corn diet is not completely digested by the monogastric because of the presence of this factor, also lectin, phytates, and other. But also important here is to remind that physiologically, the age of the animal also play an important aspect in the digestion of protein. The health status as well. For example, when you have any kind of enteritis, you're gonna have more movements in the intestine, and will reduce the time to digest. But when you talk about age, it's important here. I have this paper in piglets that show that before the weaning, they have a high activity of trypsin, amount of trypsin in the intestine. After the weaning, during the first 5 days at least, you have reductions on the presence of this enzyme, this protease from the animal. And this is a physiological process to adapt it to the new substrate that was milk for a regular feed, a regular ration, right? The same happens in chickens. Look here. Here we have this paper that shows that from 0 to 14 days, you have a different digestibility of the protein in the animal. So you see here, digestibility for casein, that is a very good and very easy digested protein. You see that even for this casein, you have reductions in digestibility from 0 to 3-4 days, and later on, after 14 days, they increase the capacity to digest it. Soybean meal, it's not the best easy protein to digest for the animal when you compare to the soy protein isolate or soy protein concentrate. But all of them show in between 0 and 4 days a low capacity of digestibility of this protein that will increase with the age. So the age of the animal is also important factor in that. And when you go specifically for the amino acid digestion, I took here the example of threonine and lysine, and you are able to see the same. Let's keep in soybean meal. You start with a low digestibility of this threonine that will be increased with the age, and the same for lysine. So this means really that the age and the quality of ingredients plays an important role in the digestibility and of the proteins. And as Emmanuel said, this is related to performance of the animals.
Okay, very, very interesting.
Another aspect here, Anouk, is that when you have these conditions of quality of ingredients, here I show different qualities of corn, different quality of soybean meal, all these in regular basis, when they are very well digested, they will be absorbed by the animal. But all the undigested part, the one that is not possible to digest because they have these antitrypsin factors or because they have different structures, they goes to the end of small intestine and large intestine, and there they will be fermented and generate different bioactive compounds. These bioactive compounds could be short-chain fatty acids, what all people think about it's good, but in fact, the fermentation of protein produces a very small amount of this, and normally it's very few amount of butyrate. But they produce a high amount of branched-chain fatty acid that is a pro-inflammatory. As a result as well, this fermentation will produce gas, will produce biogenic amines, phenol, cresols, all of it that is pro-inflammatory. And it's important to mention here that when you have these fermentations, some microorganisms that has more capacity to do it, it's the E. coli and Clostridium. So it's not a surprise that when you have this undigested protein, you have these fermentations with these microorganisms, and this increases the advantage of these microorganisms inside the gut. And this why sometimes later the process become pathological. So
Yes, of course.
all this composed will increase the inflammation.
And regarding inflammation, could you explain to us how does it affect the animal and what is going to happen when we have this inflammation that is caused by the fermentation of protein?
Yes, in fact, it's very well known the effect of inflammation in many tissues. But let's think about intestine. The function of intestine is to finalize the digestion and absorptions of nutrients. But also the gut, it's a very well-known very well-known as have a very active immunity. So when you have all these conditions of the undigested feed, this could affect how the functionality of this organ is. So when you go for remind how is the structure of the intestine, it's important to remind about the mucosa and how they have this villi. And the villi is composed of different kind of cells, enteroendocrine cells. We have enterocytes, that is absorption cells, and you have the goblet cells that produce the mucus. But in between these, you also have a lot of immune cells that could be found there. So we have a layer of epithelial cells that we call epithelial. And then we have the lamina propria, that is where we find the vessels and where you find the nerves. So in a regular base, when you have a very good digestion of protein and all the nutrients, they could be absorbed here and go for the metabolic road for the animal growth. The problem is that when this happens, you can see here in a histological way. So it's the same. Here you can see the epithelial with the cells that cause the absorptions. The blue ones, the beautiful blue ones, are the goblet cells that produce the mucus. And here in the middle, you can see the lamina propria. So in the regular and beautiful day, when you have a very good digestion of all the nutrients, they're gonna be absorbed and go to do the metabolic roads that they need to do for the animal grow and produce. And each one of these aspects has here some parameters that we measure to determine that the intestine is not with inflammation or is not is really in good conditions to absorb. So we have here the epithelial thickness, we have the lamina propria thickness, The proliferation of enterocytes that sometimes is thinking as a good things, but when you have some enteric damage, sometimes instead of the enterocyte born in the crypta and growing, what happens is that they start to proliferate here in the middle of villus, and these cells are immature and not good enough to absorb, so it's not always a good thing. And then we have goblet cells, the presence of congestion. So here it's a health villus, and all these parameters is the parameters that we use in a methodology that we call IC inside to measure the health of the gut. And you can see here in another picture what happens when inflammation is. You're going to see here that the thickness of lamina propria it's really increased as the thickness of the epithelium. You can see that you have fold here in the epithelium because you have these proliferations of immature enterocyte. So all these parameters that I mentioned just before are altered when you have this inflammation process. And this means less absorptions. This means less function of the system. And this is explain why even if you reformulate the diet to have the requirements of the animal, because we know that you have poor quality of ingredients, this part that is not digested is still doing some damage to the animal through the inflammation and reduce their capacity of absorptions. And this is why, even if they don't change the feed intake, the body weight gain and the feed conversion will be affected. So once again, here's a health value, and you can compare with all this inflammatory process. And you see that the surface is higher here. You have much more villus surface here than here, but this doesn't mean functionality. This is why we rely on IC inside methodology instead of the vilo and crypta, because the vilo and crypta sometimes just show how big is the vilo, but does not show the functionality. And the parameter of IC inside show that. In fact, this parameter was developed at the University Federal of Paraná in Brazil when I was professor there, and we add these parameters of IC inside that I mentioned that is related to the process of inflammations that we saw in the intestine. For each one of the parameters, we give an impact factor. The impact factor means how much this alteration is affecting the functionality of the organ. For example, if you have a mix of inflammatory cells in the lamina propria, this means that you have much inflammations and reductions of capacity of absorption. So this is why they receive the highest factor impact score that comes from 1, mild effect, 2, moderate effect, and 3, a severe effect. So after that, when we saw the alterations, we can give a score. The score comes from 0 to 3. 0, no alteration. 1, alterations, mild alterations, moderate alterations, and 2, and severe alteration, 3. So when you have a multiplications of the impact factor with the score of alterations that we are observing, we have a final score for this parameter. And the sum of all the 8 parameters will give a final number that we call the IC inside final result. It's a number. And why we translate it in a number? Because it's a way that even if you are not a pathologist, you are able to understand how is the effect of the inflammation and how is the functionality of the intestine that you are measuring. So with that, we publish it in many different papers around the world. So it's a methodology that have been already accepted by the community of scientific. And the most important of all, we know that as higher is the number of IC inside score, means that we have more damage of the mucosa, that the functionality are reduced, and this is high correlated with feed conversion ratio. So high icing site score, number that is big, means a worse feed conversion ratio. So it's a correlation between what we saw in terms of alterations and performance, and then this can explain to you why, even if you don't have these how can I say, even if you don't have these microscopic alterations by histology, you can see this effect on animals.
Okay, yes, it's more clear now. Then it's a very good tool to assess what is happening inside the gut when we are when we are looking at our protein. So you both highlighted before all the variation and all the impact that protein can have on the birds. And it's clear that we need to address that and to improve our management of the protein flow inside the gut. But Emmanuel, could you let us know concretely what could we do to help and to secure this part?
Yes, of course, Anouk. If we summarize what we have said with Elizabeth, is that when we look at the protein flow in the gut, we said that first the digestion of the protein occurs, okay, in the, I would say, in the upper part of the intestinal tract. Okay, so this is what we call digestible protein by the action of endogenous enzyme. Okay, and this digestible protein will be used for maintenance and growth. And we have seen that there is a relationship between digestible protein and zootechnical performances. But Elizabeth also mentioned that the non-digestible part of the protein that enter, I would say, in the lower part of the intestinal tract, this non-digestible protein could be the substrate for fermentation of most of the time, I would say, bad bacteria or negative bacteria, because we are talking about E. coli, we are talking about Clostridium. Okay, so and this fermentation, I would say, this proteolytic fermentation could affect the intestinal health of the animal. So practically, what we want to do, in fact, when we formulate, is to increase the digestible parts of the protein and decrease the non-digestible part of the protein. Okay, and this is the objective of the Jefo Pro solution. The objective of the Jefo Pro solution is to increase the digestibility of the protein. Okay, with and we expect zootechnical effect, positive zootechnical effect of this, and the consequence of that is a reduction in terms of non-digestible protein entering in the CECA, for example. And normally, what we expect is an improvement of the intestinal integrity, as Elizabeth mentioned. And to illustrate that, I will show you the results of a recent trial made in Brazil, or in a Brazilian university. And in this trial, what the researchers have done, they formulate, in fact, two nutritional programs, the T1 and the T3. The T1, I would say, it's a standard nutritional program, okay, and the T3 is the same nutritional program, okay, but with a reduction in terms of concentration of crude protein and digestible amino acid. So I would say a diluted nutritional program, diluted diets, okay, in terms of protein, and amino acid concentration. And on both, I would say this one is a positive control and this one is a negative control. On both control, they put the Jefo Pro solution. Okay, so we have T1, T2, T3, and T4. T1 and T3 for the, I would say, for the control, positive and negative, and T4 and T2 and T4, the same diets, but with the Jefo Pro solution. Okay, here you have the composition of the trial. If we look at first at the impact of reducing the density in terms of protein of the diets, by looking analyzing the IC by IC inside methodology, the integrity of the gut, we see that there is a reduction of the IC inside score. Okay, so by reducing the protein content. Okay, so, and it's not significant, but it's numerically, it's a numerical decrease. So it clearly shows that by reducing the concentration of protein, we also we also give less probability to have non-digestible protein entering in the lower part of the intestinal tract. So less risk of proterotical fermentation. So a better gut intestinal integrity at this level. Okay, but by doing that, the risk is that, of course, you have a negative impact on zootechnical performances because you also have less digestible amino acid in this in the both control in the negative control. And if we look at daily gain or feed conversion ratio, okay, here you have in gray, in dark gray, we have the positive control, standard diets. In this gray, we have the negative control, so diluted diets, okay? And you clearly see that there is a decrease in terms of average daily gain or body weight at the end of the trial, but there is also a huge increase in terms of feed conversion ratio, okay? So by diluting the diets, we have less impact on gut integrity, but we have a negative impact in terms of zootechnical performances, lower daily gain and higher feed conversion ratio. Of course, if we put Jefo Pro solution on both controls, okay, we clearly see that we increase daily gain and we decrease feed conversion ratio. So it clearly demonstrates that Jefo Pro solution was able to increase the digestibility of the protein because there is an answer in terms of daily gain. So it means that those birds have more digestible amino acid available for growth. Okay, so by putting Jefo Pro solution on normal or reduced nutritional program, we see an improvement in terms of those technical performances. But what it was really interesting, it was if we focus on IC inside score, we clearly see that the both groups, both Jefo Pro solution groups was in terms of IC inside score lower than the controls one. Okay, so it means that in both situations, Jefo Pro solution was able also to improve the gut integrity. So you clearly see with those results that by managing the protein flow, by increasing the digestibility of the protein and by decreasing the non-digestible part of the protein, we were able first to increase the zootechnical performances, and second, to improve the gut integrity of the broilers.
Thank you, Emmanuel. It's a very complete trial, and it really helps us to demonstrate that protein, it's very important for good growth of the animal, but we have a lot of factors like the quality, like the origin, that can really vary and have a deleterious effect on the production and produce inflammation. And so I hope that all this information that we shared with you allowed you to gain more knowledge about poultry nutrition and physiology regarding protein, and as well to give you tools like the Jefo Pro solution to help you to manage this protein flow and make sure that you have good and secured performance all the time. And if you have any question regarding what we have presented today, you can ask, and we will take some time and answer happily.
Just before the question, Anouk, if I can, I would recommend this book. Okay, this book is a part of the graph that I presented today. Some of them are present in this book, dealing with broiler nutrition. So don't hesitate to have this to read this very interesting book in terms of broiler nutrition.
Okay, yes, good comment. And we do have a question, Emmanuel, regarding the trial that you showed. So we have a question about the energy that was used during this, the energy level that was used in formulation for this trial.
In the last one, you say, or
seeing when the question appeared, for me it was with this Brazilian trial.
It was around 3,000 kilocal of metabolizable energy. Around, so different, because it was a 3 phases nutritional program. So the level of the metabolizable energy was different depending first of the step, I would say, of the trial, but it was around 3,000 kilocal of metabolizable energy.
Okay. I hope it answers. And we also have so we have here a question regarding the intestinal pH and how it will impact protein, and could it also have an impact on protein digestibility?
Huge impact.
Yes,
well, it's interesting questions. Thank you so much. In fact, it's like people talk so much about the changes in pH in intestine. But, you know, the organism is a very, very smart machine that I don't know if you're able to reproduce it in a different way. So anytime when you receive, like when the food comes from the stomach to the small intestine, there is receptors that detect the difference in pH. And when this happens, hormone is its release that goes to the pancreas and allow it to release the bicarbonate that comes to the intestine and regulate the pH. So however, people talk so much about changes in pH that is possible to do. There is a compensatory mechanism that avoid it. So I don't think that is pH the most important aspect that plays there. I think it's all the other metabolites that are produced from the fermentations. Yes, you could have maybe some alteration in pH, but a recent study, not so recent, but a 2013 study from Dr. Rosalind Angel shows that the variation pH in the modern broiler, it's not changed so much since the duodenum to the ileum. So basically, pH could change a little bit, but I don't think, I don't understand exactly what is the effect of what is the questions related, but I think that other metabolites produced by microbiota fermentations plays a more important factor in inflammation and functionality than pH by themselves because of the regulatory mechanism.
Good, thank you.
If I could add something, it could affect, I would say, in the very first early, I would say, in the early period of life of the broiler. But I agree with Elizabeth. With the time, normally there is a regulation of the pH in the lower part of the intestine. But it could affect, I would say, in the first days, for example. We know that on the upper part of the intestinal tract, sometimes there is not enough production of chlorhydric acid on the first days. We have exactly the same in swine. Just after the weaning, we know that the piglet is not able to produce enough in the stomach. There is not enough production of chlorhydric acid to activate, in fact, endogenous enzymes, and this is part of the explanation of the low digestibility, I would say, ability of the young animals to digest correctly the proteins.
Oh, thank you, Emmanuel. In fact, in swine, this plays important role in the stomach. But even with that, yeah, and this is really a factor. It's the why in the first stage you have this. But as I said, according to undigested protein, the effect plays later on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for this complete answer, I think, from both of you. And you were talking a bit about the effect regarding microbiota, and we do have some question regarding microbiota, and we have someone that is that would like to have more information about what is happening with the microbiota when we have diets that are high in protein.
Interesting questions. In fact, how the microbiota changes, it's normally related to increase in enterobacteria. Actually, what we saw in a recent study that was published, they did it in India with Kabir and some professors out there. It's that when you have more protein, you increase the Clostridium in the cecum. This doesn't mean so much things because microbiota is a very complex organ. I can say organ, not microorganisms. This changed a lot. But we expected that after we have excess of protein, all the microorganisms that are protease fermenters, they have advantage. And because of this advantage, they will grow more than the other ones. And this imbalance will become the play factor in terms of dysbiosis that we call the effect of undigested feed and diarrhea and gas and now this enteric process. So exactly, it's this kind of alteration what we expected.
Mm-hmm.
I would say each time you give more protein, if you do not control correctly the digestibility of the protein, you increase the risk to see non-digestible protein entering in the lower part of the intestinal tract. Okay, and as Elizabeth mentioned, the microbiota is an organ, and this organ needs nutrients. And part of this population, I would say, are happy when we give them protein, non-digestible protein, because they use it as a substrate to, I would say, first to live, and after that also to reproduce themselves. So each time we increase the protein level, we take the risk to increase the non-digestible part of protein entering in the lower part of the gut. So in fact, feeding the bacteria that normally we don't want to feed.
Okay, very, very interesting. I hope it answered your question. And regarding undigestible protein, we also have another one here that is about the impact and if Jefo Pro can help when we have soybean meals that can be overheated and so with less protein available.
It's a very good question because when we it's a good question because when we have it depends. In fact, it depends. When we talk about heat treatment, there is two aspects. There is when we have not enough heat treatment, we have a risk in terms of non-degrading anti-nutritional factors. Okay, and we have seen in a recent study that Jefo Pro solution is able, in this case, to help, of course. When we have an over-treated or an over-heat treatment, so a too aggressive heat treatment, this is a bit different. When we have a too aggressive heat treatment, what we have it's what we call a Maillard reaction. Okay, there is a reaction between proteins and sugars, and this reaction leads to unsolubilize the protein, and in this case, Jefo Pro solution will not work. I think so efficiently, because you unsolubilize the protein, and when you unsolubilize the protein, you cannot have effect, I would say, of Jefo Pro solution. But it will also happen for the, I would say, natural process of digestion of the animal, and this is what we see when we, I would say, over-treat some proteic sources. It could be for soybean meal, but it could be also for other type of proteic raw materials, of course. Elizabeth, perhaps you have a different point of view on that.
In fact, it's not a different point of view. I don't think that while the overheated protein that was already changed will be digested, but when you have this undigested nutrient, I think that the presence of the Jefo Pro can help to reduce the fermentation. Do you know? It's like, it's not that will release more this undigested protein for for the animal, but maybe reduce the fermentation and the metabolites that could cause inflammation. So this is why I saw this solution as a gut health tool as well. Because even if you don't release more for the animal because of the time, because of the situation of the protein is in that state, they could reduce the fermentation at the end. And this is also will reduce the inflammation and all the process that I mentioned before.
Okay. Okay. Yes, it is clear. So when we are, yes, not only talking about soybean meal, when we are looking at other type of protein sources, it can also help.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Yes, actually, we have some studies that show the digestibility for different kind of source of proteins. And basically, I saw something about insect meal and this kind of things. In fact, this all could be helped by increased digestibility, for sure.
Yes, some of you has some very specific question regarding application in some context, and so we won't have time to describe everything. So we will come back to you with a personalized answer to answer and to be more exhaustive and make sure that it is clear on your side as well. So do not worry if we don't have the time to address everything.
Yes, it's interesting because the time is short, right, Anouk? It's already almost at the end. And you have so many questions, what is nice, because it's nice to have it. So I think we can really go and answer it afterwards because of the time. And it was really nice.
Yes, maybe just a last question to hand. So is there a link between Jefo Pro and the environmental emission?
Yes, very good question. Of course, each time we are able to increase digestibility of protein, we have less risk of excreting, I would say, nitrogen. So of course there is an impact. There is an impact of using Jefo Pro solution on excretion, I would say, of nitrogen. So it could be interesting for environmental purpose also to use Jefo Pro solution. We have some studies on that. We know more or less the quite precisely the impact that we can expect by using Jefo Pro. We have a recent study. It was not on broilers. It was on swine, but we have seen a decrease in terms of nitrogen excretion by 4 to 5%. A decrease of from 4 to 5% of nitrogen excretion. So it's not I would say it's not anecdotic. Huh? It's quite interesting, and it could help in some I would say in some context where we know that we want to decrease the nitrogen excretion of the farms, of course.
Okay, great. It's a very complete solution indeed, and it's I really hope that everyone was able to know more, to gain more knowledge about managing protein during this hour. And it was great to see so many questions here, and we will come back to you shortly with all the answers with your contact. And thank you, of course, Elisabeth and Emmanuel, for this very interesting discussion this afternoon.